For anyone listening, whether it be staff, another member, anyone that actually gives a darn, give me your first 4 minutes. Because the first 4 minutes is I need to explain why we've been joking about it in a dark way. We're in the budget wars. It's about reconciliation. Why is there such angst by some of us? You know, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I chair the Joint Economic Committee, so I'm the idiot with all the economists. I'm number 4 on Ways and Means. I'm not good at many things in life. I'm okay at math. What's going on that is stressing us? Last night I could barely sleep because I had read report after report after report, and the math was devastating. And this is what we need to understand. Here's our reality. And forgive us, we've been going as fast as we can in our office to find some way to explain what the hell's going on. At the end of this budget year, so September 30th, end of this budget year, United States debt by Congressional Budget Office is projected to be $37.2 trillion. Okay. They're projecting over the next 10 years, we add another $20 trillion. But if you then, on top of that, so the debate that's been going on is we have these provisions of the 2017 tax reform. Thank you. The 2017 tax reform that are expiring at the end of this year. If you take it to 2035, because that's sort of the 10-year window, 9 budget years, it's another $5.5 trillion. Then you add onto that the interest, because it turns out if you were to finance it, not pay for any of it, that's another $1.3 trillion on top of that. Then if you were to come in here and then take the president's requests. So let's just, because we have a couple members here, just say, just do everything, make everyone happy. Screw my retirement, the next generation. America will be fine. If you add it all up, by 2035, you have over $74 trillion in debt. You're somewhere in the 155 or so % of the entire economy is borrowed. Today, we're a little less than 100. So the point I'm trying to make here, even if you do the calculation of publicly sold debt, because as I've tried to explain, you have like the Social Security Trust Fund, which is gone in 8 years. But we borrow the money out of that, and we do pay interest on it. But if you take everything where we sell bonds to the world, to each other, to our retirement accounts, to pensions, when the day we got elected, Mr. Speaker, so long time ago, what was that? November. U.S. sovereign debt that was held by the public was around $28 trillion. These numbers right now say that number that took, 240 years of publicly held debt, we intend to double in 9 years. In 9 years, we're going to functionally add another $28 trillion of publicly held debt. Actually, a little more if we do these things on finance. Finance them and don't try to pay for them. This is my 4-minute spiel. When you see some of us stressing out, when you see some of us, he's being disharmonious. Maybe it's because I own a damn calculator. If these numbers don't make you pucker up and scare the crap out of you, you don't understand. Yet the hallways around here are full of people that demanding we give them more money. Or they want more barriers to entry. Or they don't want to change their business models. They want to do it in archaic fashions. Because it might make them have to compete. This is no longer the next generation. This is your own retirement. Look, I accept, I'm traditionally, I tease behind this microphone, I'm pathologically optimistic. My wife and I were both 62 years old, and we have a 2.5-year-old. We've adopted, but we also have a 9-year-old. When my little boy is functionally 24 years old, the math says every single tax in America needs to be doubled just to maintain baseline services. The wheels are coming off. Do you really think the bond market Oh, we want to keep buying U.S. sovereign debt, even though you've gone and doubled it in 9 years. You don't think we're going to start to pay? We did a math problem a couple weeks ago on this floor, and we showed that if we stressed the bond markets, if we got up to a 6% handle, and it wasn't that many decades ago, U.S. sovereign debt was kissing up around 6%. In 9 years, 45% of all U.S. tax receipts went to interest. You think this is a game? The bond market is on the edge of running this country, not us. If you're a member of Congress and you claim that you care about debt and deficits and the next generation and working people and people's retirement, and you don't have this poster up somewhere in your office, how do you understand the math? The wheels are coming off. And I'm going to show in a bunch of these slides, there's a path. We can produce some level of stabilization. It means doing really hard things, which you know how good we are at doing hard things, because once again, there'll be an army of people outside the door all upset with us because we're trying to do hard things. You've known this has been coming for decades. When I was an idiot kid, in the 80s, I remember my statistics professor. She basically did a chart, this is like 1983, saying, okay, here's baby boomers. This is going to happen. There's this huge bubble. The thing we weren't prepared for is U.S. fertility rates started to collapse in 1990. We don't have enough young people. I'm going to show some charts of how hard it is to keep up productivity and growth. And it's not just the United States. It's all across the world. There's a shortage of young people. But we're going to pretend we can just grow our way out of things. That's complete, not untruth. If we do what a handful of our members are asking and just look the other way and just give everything to everyone without paying for it. And look, I think it's outrageous there's a discussion. It would be immoral, I believe, to allow the tax rates to go up on working people. But it's also immoral not to find a way to pay for it. Are you ready to condemn this country in 9 budget years, 10 calendar years, to functionally financial Armageddon? Because this is actually in the 10-year window now. This is not some theoretical number years and years and years and decades from now. It's here. And if interest rates were to move against us, it's functionally almost Armageddon. I'm going to skip. I'm going to bounce around a little bit. So think about this. Why are some of us trying so hard to get as much in the way of modernization, cost changes, those things? So we have $5.5 trillion, if you do the 2035, of expiring provisions that would raise taxes on our brothers and sisters in this country. We need that not to happen. But understand its actual cost. It's not only the $5.5 trillion. If you just did it, if you just pass it, it's another $1.3 trillion of interest over those 10 years. That means in 2035, the interest handle for America is $2 trillion a year. Just interest will be $2 trillion a year in 9 budget years if we don't find ways to do offsets. How can this not terrify people? Are there people in the White House that have calculators? Are brothers and sisters here, do you really think the debt markets, we want to buy that much more U.S. sovereign bond? Look, there's a funny fact, interesting fact, it's not necessarily funny. The world today has the highest ratio of debt since the Napoleonic Wars. And if you remember your history, after that there was years and years and years of misery as governments tried to figure out how to unwind and go to war with each other and those things because of the depressions that it caused. We're not the only country binging on debt. and I'll say this a couple times, and it's the one thing that gets me really hateful emails and text messages. 100%, well, almost 100% of the next 10 years of debt is interest and demographics. Almost all of it is Medicare. Our brothers and sisters, people like me, baby boomers, gray hair, we're moving into our earned benefits. We didn't set aside enough money, and we've been unwilling to modernize how we deliver services because it annoys the lobbyists and the people at home, and people get uncomfortable. Oh, David, you want to use technology. You don't have a choice. You just don't have a choice. It's not my feelings, it's math. But you start to look at this. If you look at the data right now, if we were to do the expiring tax provisions within the budget window, the United States will pay $2 trillion plus a year just in interest. And that's at today's interest rates. That's without even a calculation of raising interest rates going up. I've been trying to figure out how to sort of explain. I can say this one easier. We're going to come close to spending the 7% of the entire economy this year in borrowed money. If we do these things without paying for them, in 10 years, we're not going to be borrowing 7% of the economy. We're going to be borrowing around 9.2% of the economy. This is not a game. So let's actually walk through one or two more of these to try to get our heads around what's actually going on. You got to understand, you see the blue here? Okay, dark purple, if that's purple. Forgive my, this is interest. That's our debt we're adding. And here's our problem. What happens this year if we borrow a couple $1 trillion this year? You do realize half that's interest. Half of it is now interest. Interest now is the second biggest expense in the United States government. Defense is actually number 4. I always love it when I'm having a conversation with one of my friends on the left. Well, if we just cut defense, defense is now number 4 on the spend stack. Interest is number 2. And there's a couple models that if we keep borrowing and interest rates move against us in a decade or so, interest could be the number 1 expense in the United States government. And I've done presentation after presentation of this concept called interest fragility. I think I'm probably the only one that listened to it, and sometimes I wonder if I even listen to myself. This isn't a game. There's a reason the British government collapsed this summer. Liz Truss? Yeah, we're a hell of a lot bigger economy. Do we really think, because we have the 2 great extraordinary privileges of the reserve currency and being a country that people want to do business in, live in, prosper in, do you think we keep those things if we keep this sort of clown show going? So let's actually walk through a couple more of these, and then I'm going to try to have a little fun mocking some of the suggestions that keep coming in. Debt held by the public under alternative conditions. Trying to make increase in primary deficits. This is where, and I need to explain, this is going to be a little tricky. In 2033, because what was done in this body in lame duck, where we functionally took another couple $100 billion out of Social Security and paid it out without replacing the money, now it looks like the number is in mid-2033, Social Security Trust Fund is empty. CBO, now the law for Social Security says you cut seniors' benefits, math is about 20%, so we will double senior poverty the following year. But that's not how CBO is forced under the law to do the math. The math, there's an actual law that says you're not allowed to show a zero balance. That's why we're doing this. So that means in 2034, there's $600 billion of borrowing that's shoved in that's actually to make up the balance, the shortfall in Social Security. The next year, it's more. So if you add up 2023, 24, 25, there's like another 1.7 trillion because Social Security is empty. And you don't want to double senior poverty, but we're also far too fearful to actually tell, our voters the truth. And the fact of the matter is, every time one of us idiots, me, gets up and tries to find a way to stabilize the Social Security Trust Fund, that side starts running attack ads on you because they care more about winning the next election than they do doubling senior poverty in America. It's just absolutely immoral. It's almost like, because the math, so you start to look at what's going on here. If we're really heading towards a time where just the primary deficit that's publicly sold without the other request from the president, we're at 55 plus trillion. And that's, we're playing a very dangerous game here. And yet, my sense of frustration is off the charts. And look, this one's, it's very simple. Within the budget window, publicly held debt, not also the borrowing from the trust funds, publicly held debt, if we were to do the expiring tax provisions without paying for them, we're at 149% of debt to GDP. We will functionally have raised U.S. debt by 50% in 9 budget years. So how many members here ran on a promise of, we're going to save America, we're going to save our retirements, we're going to save our kids, we're going to save the future, we're going to pretend math doesn't exist? Because this is what's going on. So let's actually walk through some of the ideas that have been coming into our office. And when I do this, yeah, there's going to be a little tone of sarcasm, but it's more for my own personal amusement. Trying to help people understand how big 12 zeros is. Trying to understand how difficult this math is. Because if I watch one more idiot on cable television saying, all we have to do is this, look how wonderful that is, that's not the math. So let's actually have a little fun here. Okay, great. Wall Street Journal yesterday said, hey, there's 40,000 federal employees which have said they'll take a retirement package. Okay, I'm ignoring, hey, if they took the package today, we pay them through the rest of the year. I'm just ignoring that math. But what is 40,000 federal employees times an average salary? I think we used 106,000, which we got from one of the reports, and you just multiply that. And understand, and this is the conservative number, we're borrowing about $6 billion a day. That 40,000 federal employees leaving is a single day of borrowing. For an entire year, all those folks leaving, single day of borrowing. You got 12 hours or 24 hours of borrowing by 40,000 federal employees leaving. Yet I watched someone on television last night saying, well, look, we're going to make a huge dent in the U.S. deficit with these 40,000 taking early retirement. It's one day of borrowing. That's not spending, borrowing. And remember, by the end of the decade, that borrowing's up per day dramatically. Take this in. This is one of the grand solutions. Now, the point I want to make is you probably have to do it. You got to do all of them. It's going to be dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of things all stacked up just to provide some stability. Because can we as a country get back to just borrowing about 3% of our economy a year instead of 7, or God forbid, a decade from now over 9? But you got to stop lying to each other. Our staffs have to stop lying to us. The press has to stop making crap up. And we've got to help the public understand the scale of what the hell's going on. 40 100,000 employees taking early retirement. The salary savings is 1 day of borrowing. So let's have a little more fun. Okay, so someone yesterday said, okay, let's get rid of the federal subsidy on tax-exempt bonds for stadiums. Okay, great. We calculate that's about 6 or 7 seconds of borrowing for a year. Seven seconds. But this is worthy. Yeah, I'm going to throw it in the stack, but is this really your debate line? We're not going to subsidize tax-exempt interest for billionaire sports team owners? Great. Okay, fine. But it's 7 seconds. So let's do a couple of the really popular ones. Absolutely, we're going to have to do some of these things. Suggest cut their, Department of Education salaries. So if you get rid of the Department of Education salaries, and I think this is all of them, is about $2.75 billion. So we just wiped down, remember, you still got to transfer the loan portfolios and all those things, but you just got rid of the employees. You just covered 9 hours of borrowing. 9 hours of borrowing. Am I starting to make a point on the scale of what we have to actually tell the truth and deal with? So let's have a little more fun here. One of my favorite ones, because I had this the other day, let's get rid of health care for those who are here illegally. Okay, now most of the math we did here is Obamacare subsidies for DACA recipients. We come up with about this is the emergency services for undocumented. So we calculate that to be about $2.1 billion a year. This is the emergency health care on undocumented. Okay, got you another 9 hours. So let's actually go to something a little bigger. Let's get rid of the foreign aid. Okay, foreign aid's gone. You got yourself a week. How many times of those of us on the right, I've been in a debate with another Republican, if we just didn't have foreign aid, we'd be fine. Okay. Now, you've got to deal with the reality of what that does to our military, our footprint in the world, protecting the reserve currency. Why are we the reserve currency? Because we have a footprint, we protect the trade routes, but look, you should know that from your history. But you just wiped it out. You just covered a week of borrowing. Am I starting to make a point here? This is why it's hard. Close the carried interest loophole. Okay, it's about, my math is actually not 12, it's about 13 billion over 10 years. Okay, so it's 13 billion over 10, so you got 1.3 billion. So I'm going to talk around the chart. So 1.3 billion in a year. We borrow about 6 billion a day. So you get yourself an hour, a couple hours. But it's a great talking point. We should get rid of that carried interest on those rich people. Fine, but don't act like it actually solves something. Back to interest fragility, Mr. Speaker. One of the discussions, and this is a little geeky, but it's really, really sort of important. About half of our debt is in what we call notes. So look, there's bills, notes, bonds. It's the hierarchy of a bill is very short term, can be under a couple years. The notes are in the middle term. But right now, half of our debt, actually more than half of our debt, actually about 72% of it is really short term. So we did I was doing it in my head, We're going to borrow about $2 trillion virgin this year, and we're going to probably have to refinance 9 or 10 this year because so much, and that's not the roll, because we have a lot of roll where it goes, sometimes 30 days, 90 days, 6 months. If interest rates move against us, it moves into U.S. debt calculations. Within a year or two, it's all in there. And that's why there keeps being this discussion of, could we go out further? If you want to know what others are, those are the inflation adjusted bonds. But that's why you talk about interest fragility. If suddenly the world goes a little haywire on us, our inflation ticks up and interest rates go up, it pounds the United States, because the previous administration and the one before that, and heaven forbid back into the Obama administration, they stayed very short on the curve because it was a little bit cheaper. The danger of that is if interest rates move against us, it's a technical economic term, we're absolutely screwed. And back to the point on all the notes, as they're all the way down around 2.8. The actual cost of a 10-year is 4.5. All this is going to move into being dramatically more expensive. And you go, oh, who cares? When you functionally have, by the end of this year, close to $30 trillion that has to be borrowed from capital markets, from people around the world, this is a big deal. I showed a little while ago if we were to just finance the $5.5 trillion of expiring tax provisions over the 10 years, that's just $1.3 trillion just financing that. Now imagine the movement on everything else. And you'll be happy to know, because I think a little while ago, UK actually, their 10-year bond actually moved cheaper, less expensive, lower interest rate than the United States. So I think we're back to being the 14th best bet of substantial countries in the world, meaning there's 13 other countries with better credit ratings. Their 10-year bond sells cheaper than the United States. Greece today can sell a 10-year bond almost a full point cheaper than the United States. Doesn't that set off an alarm in anyone's head? Am I the only idiot who, sorry, I mean to be going there. I'm trying to find some way, because I'll get these criticisms. David, you talked about math. I don't like math. You may not like it, but the math will always win. So back to a couple more points. The famous pie chart. Everything a member of Congress votes on is borrowed money. Every dime of defense is borrowed money. Every dime of non-defense discretionary is borrowed money. I think last fiscal year, $400 billion of earned benefits. And look, what we call the mandatory, the red. Some of that, most of it's earned benefits. It's your Social Security, it's your Medicare, it's your VA pensions, those sorts of things. There's a portion that you get because you're part of a certain tribal population, it's part of a treaty obligation, or you fell below a certain income, Medicaid, or those things. You're basically now in a world 75-25. But the numbers are actually better now. So in 2024 fiscal year, for every dollar the United States took in tax receipts, we borrowed $1.39. Excuse me, we spent $1.39. So $1 in, $1.39 out. But it's better now. Now, for every dollar we get in, because tax receipts are actually up, we spend $1.36. How do we go home and tell our folks the scale that the simple solutions are absolutely wrong? They're not truthful. It turns out we have a brutally complex problem. It's going to require a complex solution, and it's going to require doing hard things. But we have people, but I will only vote for if I get this. And those are the very people who I promise you aren't watching this presentation. This isn't a game. These numbers keep getting uglier and uglier. And back to the thing it gets me screamed at, and this board now is getting old, and the numbers are actually worse. Over the next 30 years, we believe the total debt number over the next 30 years is now substantially higher, but this is the one I have. Your country borrows about we spend about $124 trillion deficit. But the things we vote on actually grow slower than tax receipts. So here's the crazy thing. The defense and discretionary, if we had actually followed the sequestration, which we'll bust those caps. As a matter of fact, that's part of the discussion we're having right now is, it makes some of our folks unhappy, so we're going to bust the caps. But if we followed the actual law, in 30 years, defense and non-defense discretionary actually have what we would call a $9 trillion positive. They grew slower than tax receipts. But Medicare and Social Security actually together produce about $116 trillion in deficit, and it's just those two programs and their interest. It's not Republican or Democrat, it's demographics. But telling the truth about demographics isn't great politics. Our job is to blame the other side and then blame us, and then we'll go back and forth and we'll have these incredibly petty, childish, mathematically void debates. Debt deficit and demographics. It is what we are. The difference is, I believe those of us on the right, those of us who are Republicans, have the absolute moral obligation. We're supposed to be the math people, to fix it. Let the other side lie about it. We campaigned, we won. The American people gave us the House, they gave us the Senate, they gave us the presidency. And suddenly, the obligation, we did all this moralizing, and now we run away from the difficulty. So let's actually now have the other thing where I'm going to start to really make a couple of my brothers and sisters annoyed around here. United States, according to the Census Bureau from last month, will have more deaths than births in 8 years. Not a single country in the world, and this is not just the United States, it's basically all the industrialized countries, and much of the world is way ahead of us in this almost dystopian collapse of there being young people. No other country has actually been able to change natalist fertility rates, whatever pop culture word you want to use. There's countries out there that on your third child, they buy you a house, and all they did is move fertility forward, and boom, a couple years later, they just moved back to the mean. Why is this a big deal? When you start to understand total fertility rates and what it means to being able to grow an economy, I'm begging you, give this a chance. If you're watching this, you're obviously unusual, you're smart. If you have a shortage of young people in your country, how do you grow? How do you reach productivity? And there becomes, we can do it by policy. You're not going to have more children, but are you willing to make it easier to adopt technology? Are you going to be fearful of AI, machine learning? Are you going to allow synthetic biology to cure diseases? Are you going to promote automation everywhere you can because you're going to have a shortage of workers? Are we going to remove the regulatory barriers, the financing barriers to basically having a much more productive society, because if you don't, there's absolutely no way you can make the math work. This is the reality. And a couple weeks ago, I did a whole series of charts showing if the United States would take on the rest of the world. Because you understand, besides the tax arbitrage the world uses by refunding their value-added tax, yet when we send them something, they put it on. So there's already this tax arbitrage the rest of the world uses on us. The other stupidity we engage in this country is we educate people in our fine universities, and we send them home to compete with us. Wall Street Journal today actually has an article on drug discovery and drug research and how fast China is basically competing with us now in new biologics and those things. And the basic premise is that we educated the very people that are competing with us because we sent them home because we're idiots. And yet I will get folks who will now, right now, pounding out texts saying, but I don't want foreigners in there. Do you want us to be able to pay your Medicare bills? Because if we don't get the growth. So it turns out, what are the two extraordinary privileges of the United States? It's our currency. The world borrows and trades and denominates in U.S. currency. The other, and the economists will tell you, it's worth even more than being the reserve currency of the world. People want to do their business, their investments, bring their intellect, their passions, their entrepreneurialism to the United States. So in the 70s, 80s, 90s, the world knifed each other for hydrocarbons, oil. Last decade, we competed, whether you know it about, for rare earths. The rest of the world figured this out about 10 years ago when Australia, New Zealand, Great Britain, Canada all moved to talent-based, STEM-based systems of saying they need smart people to be able to continue to grow. I think the United States is the only major country still doing a familial-based immigration system. And this upsets people when I say this. I want to be able to sponsor my grandma. Great. I'm sure she's lovely. But from an economist standpoint, if we are going to survive as an economy, and particularly if we're about to put together a package on how we're going to cover the $5.5 trillion of expiring provisions by saying, here's the cuts, and we're going to build growth in, are we willing to do the things that are required to hit that growth number? Well, it turns out, yes. Modernizing regulation, great. Turns out, as an economist, you can't hit the number without a talent-based, STEM-based immigration system. You just can't. Because here's your problem. We've built the models. So if we're going to extend expensing for research and development, so we're doing things better, faster, cheaper. What happens when the very companies that are doing that, the research labs that are doing it, continue to show up in my office and say, we can't get enough people. We're being squeezed. We're going to have to do part of the research on the other side of the world. Have we lost our minds? Oh, but David, you can't tell that. That will upset someone. Look, the chaos that was created at the border over the last 4 years crushed the working poor, because the working poor sells their talents, their willingness to show up. And now you have millions and millions and millions of other entries. So there's a couple great articles out there basically talking about the working poor's wage growth will probably be flat for the next decade. But there's also part of that same report says you're getting close, I think it was $900 billion, so almost $1 trillion over 10 years of new tax receipts if you move to a STEM-based, talent-based immigration system. And the next decade, it's parabolic. It just explodes, because that way you're integrated in the economy. Are we allowed to have that conversation, Mr. Speaker, saying, okay, we're going to do this, we're going to tell ourselves we're going to start growing at these great rates? Are we going to do the very tools that allow us to grow, that allow us to prosper, to allow us to raise the productivity? Because, and this chart I know is almost impossible to read. Its punchline is very simple. Unless we have this productivity spike, we're going to get poorer. We see it around the world that productivity the ability to have that productivity growth is how you keep up standards of living. We've had a great pop the last couple of years. You know, the investments in AI, those things. But are we going to keep it up? Are we basically going to give our competitive advantage to the rest of the world because we're going to educate the very talent that's bringing it to us and send them home? So, Mr. Speaker, I'm hoping I accomplished three things here. To give you a sense of how just absolutely brutal the math is and why it's absolutely necessary we do the moral thing of reduce the spending, modernize the way we deliver services, make the tax code actually grow, and then deal with the reality of what drives our debt and deficits, and then deal with the reality of how we maximize growth and productivity and wealth. Prosperity is moral. I actually believe it is actually the American ethos. My kids, your kids, deserve to be more prosperous than the generation before them. And every data point we hold says our kids will be poorer than our generation. Is that the morality we've decided to bathe in? And with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield.